David Brewster, this guy, was a lot of things. I could give you a whole essay on his life and work, but Wikipedia is free and much more reliable. I bring him up because he was the inventor of the kaleidoscope, and that's what this is actually about. His book, A Treatise on the Kaleidoscope, is going to come up later, so keep it in the back of your mind. I don't recall the initial train of thought, but what I do remember is being suddenly very interested in all the versions of kaleidoscopes out there. And these aren't just piddly little end changes, like having an oil wand or chamber piece. No. These were changes to the very internal structure, the mirrors themselves. The typical kaleidoscope is an equilateral triangle, all internal angles being 60 degrees. But there are so many ways to make a kaleidoscope, including the tapered or polyhedral telescope. While the usual kaleidoscope has flat, repeating patterns, the polyhedral makes a 3D image, creating a dazzling display. I was so captured by this, in fact, that I immediately jumped into making one with no further research or forethought, except for one thing. The concept is simple. Build one of these neat polyhedral kaleidoscopes with threads on both ends. These threads will allow you to switch both which side you look through and what you're looking at. This makes it modular, allowing only the limits to be your ingenuity and creativity. It is lucky that kaleidoscopes have been around for a while, because that means I don't have to do any of the hard math of finding a nice angle. I've already decided that I want this to fit nicely in the hand, so it needs to be less than 6 inches long. This site mentioned that for tapered systems, 12 to 15 degrees would suffice. I went with 12, since that would decrease the diameter of the finished system. Okay, math time. We know that our angle is 12 degrees, pictured here. The longer our system, the wider our diameter is going to be, so we want to keep it under 6 inches. We also have to have at least some space at the smaller end to, see through. So let's define that first at, say, 15 millimeters. Let's also be nice and say the length will be 100 millimeters. Given these, we can start to solve for the long end by imagining another triangle here within this trapezoid. Since we know two angles, the 90 comes with a bisection, and a side, we can either use some trigonometry ourselves or pop the numbers into a triangle solver, which gives a length of 21.256. But this is only for the portion over our original 15, and needs to be doubled for the other side. So 21.256 times 2 is 42.512, plus 15 equals 57.512 millimeters. I'm rounding down to 57 just for simplicity. Now we can make the model in Fusion. Not much to say on modeling, and I didn't bother recording it, so just a few highlights. The only maybe non-beginner thing here is that to connect the two sides, you need to use a loft. You'll also need to account for the fact that mirrors aren't paper flat by adding an offset. For some research, I found some mirrors that had a thickness of 1.25 millimeters, so I went with that. I also added some 1/8 inch thick circles for some acrylic to protect the mirrors inside later. This first model is pretty basic, just the body and 2 exchangeable caps. Let's get a physical prototype. So here comes our first print of body and caps. Ignore the quality for now, this is purely for testing purposes. For the most part, it does work. The caps go on well, for this side. See, during modeling, I had gotten it into my head that I needed to be smart and change the handedness of the threads on each side, for some reason. So now, this one will not accept these caps. And this is a body issue, switching the caps works. So, make a quick 2-click fix in Fusion, and then make another print. This one is better, but due to the poor print quality, the caps don't fit on entirely on this side. And again, switching the caps shows it is a body issue. On the bright side, it does fit nicely in the hand. So, I changed how I'm getting these printed to make this white version. I also made a new cap for a single pane rather than the chamber one I had previously, since it saved on printing time. Already, this one looks better. Both sides twist on nicely to both sides, and it looks at least somewhat cleaner. Having successfully gotten a decent print, I moved on to adding the acrylic. I'm using 1/8 of an inch clear acrylic, cut on a Glowforge from my local library. Everybody say thank you to local libraries. Coming back home, I start by removing the papers, which is in itself a whole ordeal that took longer than it should have. Once they're off, super glue is applied to the edge, and the acrylic is placed flush on top. See that puddling? We're going to get back to that. I do the same thing for the caps, then put them aside to dry. Now, earlier that same day, I had gone out and bought a craft mirror and a mirror cutter. While kaleidoscopes typically use first surface mirrors, I just wanted a quick test on your basic run-of-the-mill mirrors just to confirm everything is dandy. Cutting mirrors, and glass in general, is pretty simple stuff. You score the top of the mirror with a glass cutting tool, and then snap it on something to make a clean break. Very easy, very approachable. However, a few things. 1. The mirror I bought was 1/8 of an inch, which is not fun to try to cut, especially for a beginner. You typically want to cut stuff thinner than 1/8 of an inch. 2. It had beveled sides. Very difficult to cut a straight line while also changing your y-axis. And 3. It's 1/8 of an inch thick, which means when you try to assemble it in my model based on a thickness of 2 millimeters, you get this. But wait, it gets worse! See, even with this horrible version, we could at least get a basic understanding what a final image would look like, and confirm where we're headed. I had based this whole thing off the idea that the angled mirrors would make a 3D image at the bottom, and thus an overall better, cooler kaleidoscope. But just looking on the inside shows the image isn't traveling up the tube. It's all trapped at the bottom. If you actually look closely at the ones online, you'll see that most people either dropping stuff inside for it to reflect, and or have scored lines inside to make more points of interest outside of just the cap. Since the point of the project was removable caps, I can't just drop stuff inside to make that nice 3D reflection, and I won't score lines in because at that point, half the visual effect comes from the mirrors that can be changed out and not the removable caps. And it gets worse! Remember how that super glue was puddling earlier? Yeah, well that isn't even the half of it. As the miniatures people figured out forever ago, super glue is the apparent enemy of clear acrylic and will take any chance to just cloud its surface. Combine that with the fact that gluing these on just generally looks a bit trash, the whole project is looking awful. I was not in my happy place. After sitting on my researching failure for a day, I decided to just go with a normal, non-tapered design. This time, I'm going with a 60-60-60, since it seems like it'll be the easiest to assemble. Brewster had also noted this configuration as being uncommonly splendid, so another win, I guess. Making the new model was simpler than the old, since I didn't need to loft the 2 eye holes this time, and everything else was just the tube. One print later, and we have a new design. Since I was still a bit sore from my earlier disappointments, I had already decided this was going to be my final design, and so also took the liberty of making some new attachments. The first was a general eyepiece, just to hide the threads on the sides. Then, I also remade the chamber piece. Finally, I made this new piece, which takes in a screw at the top. This can be used for holding pieces that can be spun, like this test wheel or these 4-panes. I actually had to go through 3 revisions of this 4-pane, since each time the circles weren't lining up with the tube, meaning you could see part of the corners when looking through. The 3rd iteration still had this, but it's less noticeable. Plus, when they're all together, it looks really cool. I had also bought 2 sets of pre-cut first surface mirrors earlier, so by the time the prints were done, they had also arrived. This served 2 purposes. A, I can actually test fit with pieces not too large for the tube. B, I can still get a basic idea of how to handle first surface mirrors. Keeping the protective film on, I used some electrical tape to keep them in rough formation for testing. Testing showed promising results this time around. Ignoring the fact that the film was still on and clogging the view, you can see that the color from this yarn does travel up the tube, meaning no dead spots like last time. This was also a good time to test the fit inside the tube, where I discovered it was just a touch loose due to my adding too much room in the model. This is another easy fix in Fusion. But also, anyone that's ever taken a geometry class knows that there's more than one type of triangle. Even old Brewster knew this, because in that same section of his book, he listed 2 more configurations, the 45-45-90 and the 30-60-90. And testing with the new mirrors, the 30-60-90 does look really nice. And while I did buy 2 sets of mirrors for redundancy purposes, I could just make another tube. Because then it's like more modular, right? So that's exactly what I did. Since I already needed to redo the 360s inside the triangle, I just made another model for the 30-60-90 at the same time. I referenced the old file just to make sure all the dimensions were the same, and thus all the attachments would fit, then reprinted. So now I have 2 tubes. The new one is green, both for quick identification and being a little tired of the white. Back to the disc for assembly, I start by taking some E6000 glue and gluing a piece of the acrylic to the bottom of my 360 tube. Internet said E6000 wouldn't fog, so slap it on with a dowel and put the acrylic on top. Just to make sure it stays in place while drying, screw on one of the eyepiece caps. Then back to the mirrors. I disassembled my test versions to both have better access to the protective wrap and to try to get the angles a bit more accurate. Once they're back in triangle form, I peel off the protective layer. Once that's finished, I give it a bit more strength by adding even more electrical tape and some hot glue. This was actually a slight misstep, as it bulked the outside too much so that it no longer fit nicely in the tube, so I had to remove some of that extra tape and glue. Once it would fit nicely again, I slid the mirrors in and hot glued the side on so it wouldn't shake around. Looking through shows the first surface mirrors being fantastic, but that I got the angles wrong, which is why it's not perfectly symmetrical. Oh well, so it goes, so attempt to put the last piece of acrylic on, only find that the mirror is still a touch too long, and so the acrylic won't lay flat. Which is great. Very nice, very good. I fixed this with a rotary tool. It doesn't look nice, but it gets the job done. Having finished this tube though, a couple of things come up. 1. I'm bad at gluing. This is entirely a me issue in both quantity and style, but both gluing events have had glue leaking into the eye area, making it a less than clear viewing experience. 2. The acrylic in mirrors really like picking up dust, which is hard to remove from a long tube. I need to both clean the acrylic before and after setting it to get the maximum clarity, as well as ensure the mirror doesn't have any issues. And 3. Glue just generally doesn't look good. From the side, the tube looks great, but looking dead on, you can see it was glued in, and it doesn't look all that fantastic. Those last two are, unfortunately, problems baked into the design. The tube is too long to clean the acrylic once in for the first side, and can't be cleaned on the second. And these have to be glued in, since that's what holds the mirrors in. Luckily, there is a way around this. Instead of printing one full tube, let's cut it in half. This will make the acrylic closer to an opening for easier reach, as well as being able to clean both sides before completing. This doesn't solve the glue issue though. For this, we need to do something else. Only a little bit of research later, I found that acrylic was actually a fantastic choice for eyepieces, since you can 3D print directly on top of it. This solves the gluing issue, since if we just sandwich the acrylic during the printing phase, the actual print will hold it in place. A couple of tests with some spare acrylic came out well, so back to the modeling software to make the new model. New model, quick and easy to make. Just add lips to the acrylic beds and cut the tube in half. Add some pins and holes for easier alignment, and it's done. Easy peasy. While that's printing, measure out what we want to cut on the mirrors, and cut on the opposite side of the covering. Do so mostly successfully, except for this bit here, where somehow I managed to scrape off the circle. Annoying! Tube is finished printing, looks very nice. Ignore the middle strip, I ran out of green. I'd actually washed it this time, and kept the triangle in its own Ziploc, so little to no dust should be hanging around. Give it just a touch more glue before shoving it into one side of the body. Confirm fit, and shininess, before proceeding. Still not optimally lined up, but at this point, that's a given. Separate the halves just enough to shove a dowel with E6000 in, and coat the inside. Since it's not see-through, it won't look like trash. Wipe off the excess, then leave something heavy on it to dry. And then the 30-60-90 tube is done. At this point, we have two mildly nice kaleidoscopes. You can point them at stuff and see colors. Great, but not the purpose of the project, because if it was, more focus would be spent on getting those mirrors lined up. Instead, it's about those fashionable accessories. We've already made some test ones, but let's go over both old and new. The simplest is this Kaleidoscope cap. It's got a lens to magnify the image inside, which gives the visuals inside more to play with. Then, we can update the forepaint. To not waste as much plastic as I already have, I did take one of the open back prototypes, glued in some acrylic, and painted on it to see what would happen. It looks rough, but the visuals are nice. The new sandwich version instead gets etched designs, courtesy of the local library Glowforge. I'm particular to the ones with more gaps, but they're all quite good. Now, the chamber piece is a little more difficult. Much like the Kaleidoscope body, I can't just print it all in one piece, since I need to shove stuff in the middle part. Thus, the solution is the same, splitting it in half. My original intention was to fill it with rocks or something and then glue it closed, but after a test run with some scrap fabric, I actually like being able to open and close it. Obviously, a friction fit isn't great for heavier objects, so another bookmark. And since we had a test piece of a wheel, let's make one of those too. Same method as the rest, this time just a bit bigger with hooks on the side. They're intended for rubber bands, should the screw not be enough to hold things together. Again, scrap fabric for testing. Add another bookmark about the hooks. I guess we want to get super into it, there's also this eye hole piece. Just a cap with a hole in it. Intended to go against your eye, but I guess you could use it as a design piece. Now there's one more experimental cap I have currently. So, a pinhole camera, bright light, pinhole, reversed image. Cool. Why not for Kaleidoscope? So I flattened out a soda can, punched a hole with a needle, and tried it out. Didn't work. I imagine there is a universe where it does, but the current one with current me does not have it in it. But what it does do is project dots on the wall if you have a flashlight on the opposite end, triangles if on the same. While unintended, I do like the effect, so I made a nicer looking one, again friction fit, and punched a bunch of holes through it. Maybe more testing in the future, but it's interesting in the now. Okay, let's cover those bookmarks now, shall we? For the chamber piece. As it stands, it's a friction fit, which we covered. If I intend to upgrade it, the most likely event either would be adding threads like we have on the body to cap, or magnets. Threads would thicken the outside, but would make a nice, dependable fit. Magnets, on the other hand, are new and exciting. While I keep it slim, I'm not sure how much I can trust magnets for higher-end durability. In either case, these upgrades will have the modularity needed, and could extend the chamber area for more. The wheel is my problem child. While the rubber band idea has merit, it wasn't my first choice. I actually wanted to go with a rubber ring on the outside to get full coverage. But I couldn't find exactly what I was looking for immediately, so went with the band idea. This is partially a better idea, since it can now extend for things that aren't neatly flat, but it isn't my favorite. I'll need to look at it in the future to make it better. Finally, the pinhole caps. These I have the most ideas on, since I played with it the least. The friction cap actually works here, since the aluminum is lightweight and doesn't need much strength to stay put. I have two multi-part ideas. The first, to glue the aluminum to the top cap and have those be the exchangeable parts. This means less printing overall, since the top takes the least amount of material. The dual part of the idea is combining it with the screw piece that holds the wheels. This would give the single piece more versatility. The second idea is a chip form. Instead of a bendy aluminum, maybe a firmer, poker chip-like material that could slot in and out of the cap. This reduces the 3D printing needed to only the initial cap print, and then everything else relies on the chips you put through. If this is the case, you could also add layers of lighting, with holes being the brightest, some shallows for less, and full material for complete darkness. Both ideas have the possibility of using old film as well, just like those projector flashlight toys you may have seen as a child. Alright, let's wrap this up. For future revisions, 1. Liquid-based caps. Oil ones in chambers do seem intriguing, but 3D prints don't seem the safest for liquid, so I didn't flood chamber. And oil ones are just slightly too expensive for me to justify buying or making one just for collector's guilt. 2. Having it be expanded beyond just a 3-part system would be nice. For example, a Kaleidoscope and a 4-pane could be interesting, as could a very long, multiple-part chamber. 3. Actually getting a tapered system to work. I can envision it working, especially if you had a dome on the inside to protect the mirrors. Your only drawback is that, based on sizing, it would probably be incompatible with the normal, non-tapered designs. Also popping in to say, probably not using glue. Apparently melting 3D prints is pretty easy, so next time I'm probably going to do that. In the future, I should probably do more research before jumping into a project, to avoid another disappointment. Spend more time on what might seem to be small details, in the case of misaligned mirrors, and get better at fusion, because that would make better systems in the future and probably save me a bit of time. I'll probably come back around to this eventually. I just need a new thing to work on for a while. Get the juices moving different. Anyways, I can see the rest of the time to pretty pictures.